If you've never worked in a church, then you probably have no idea what goes on behind the curtain. And I worked in a church for a long time. And look, I believe in the mission. I gave everything that I had to it. But eventually, I started asking some questions as well. Questions about the money, questions about NDAs, and questions about why it sometimes seemed that we cared more about the image of the organization than people. And that's when things started getting uncomfortable. Today, I'm going to be joined by Josh Barbour from the Dad Challenge podcast. And he's not just a content creator, he's another former pastor who saw some of the same red flags that I did. So in today's conversation, we're talking about systems that silence church staff members. We're talking about the pressure to perform instead of to shepherd, and the damage that it does to people who trust the church most. This isn't gossip. This is just an honest conversation about what we've seen, where the church sometimes really misses it, and how we can get better. And it's time that we pull back the curtain so that we can have open and honest discussions about how we can all work to create safer and healthier churches. Now, Josh and I, we both love Jesus and we both believe that the church can change the world. But we also believe some things have to change in the modern church system for us to get there. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about it together. All right, guys, welcome back to the Church Disrupted podcast with your host, Jeff Cochran. And today we got a special conversation coming up with Josh Barbour of the Dad Challenge podcast. And maybe you're familiar with the Dad Challenge podcast, maybe you're not. If you are, you're going to be getting ready for the snark because it's going to be coming. It's going to be a part of this conversation. If you're not familiar with the Dad Challenge podcast, Josh spends a lot of time and effort. He is passionate about really bringing awareness and stopping the exploitation of kids in the influencer industry and online. It really is an incredible work that he is doing. But what a lot of people don't know about Josh is Josh, you were a pastor for a long time. So today, I wanted us to sit down as two ex-pastors around the table. I want to hear a little bit about your story, and I wanted us to take some time to pull back the curtain and just give people a peek of some of the things that are going on in churches today that they often don't know, some questions they should be asking, and not to hurt the church or anything like that. But we just I really want to invite people into conversations that they need to be having, but we can't have them if we don't know what's going on. And luckily, we got two people around the table who are ex-pastors who did not sign broad sweeping NDAs that keep us legally silenced. And we'll talk about that, but that's exceedingly rare, which is why we don't get to have a lot of these conversations. So thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit more about you, what you do, and how you got here? How'd you move from being a pastor to this space?
I mean, like most pastors, I wasn't a real pastor. I was a worship pastor. I don't say I'm a real, or obviously ordained pastor because just the church allows it to be. I did go to Bible college. First 2 years of my post-secondary education was two different schools, two different Christian universities. The second one was for my worship degree. It wasn't even a degree, it was a certificate. But music I didn't even enjoy music until I was like in my 20s. So I grew up very, very poor, very, very abusive relationship with my family. You can go on my channel. I have a 5-part series about my life story. It's pretty hard to hear. But the church, I accredit the church to saving my life. With that big red van that went around and picked up children in our neighborhood didn't happen, I would not be a Christian today. I don't think I would be where I am without that big red van with these two people that we thought were married, but brother and sister. Weird. I know, weird. But you can't do it anymore, but they picked us up, kids in a lot of low income areas, and they brought them to church, and church saved my life. And I'll say that, I want to say that right off the top, that the church did a lot of good in my life and a lot of bad. But I started out after school.
And just if we could clarify too, Josh, like you don't hate the church. You haven't walked away. Like you're still, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think you would still describe yourself as a believer in Jesus, not necessarily a believer in the religious expression of what we do today.
No, it's pretty close. Yeah. I don't like religion anymore. I mean, I still would like to go to church. I still want my kids to be a part of a youth group and experience that. My kids still pray at night. We still pray as a family. I think my belief in Jesus is stronger than it ever has been. I mean, I started a series on my channel called Bible Stories of Swearing, which is not for everybody. But what I do is I read the Bible myself, and I encourage others to read the Bible themselves. And I tell the Bible stories in a way that's, I think, more exciting than a lot of people do it. And I ask questions that I don't have answers to, like, why did God harden Pharaoh's heart when we have free will? Like, those are questions that a lot of people, they think they have all the answers to, but I leave the questions unanswered because I don't know them and I never will. Right? There's certain things I might not ever know. But you're right. I love Jesus, and I'm also, though, not in a place where I think that I'm in a good spot as a Christian either, right? So I'm really wrestling with it, and I was really the guy that was like, let's tear this down, let's tear this whole thing to shreds. But it wasn't tearing God to shreds, it was tearing down the institution that I think has ruined this experience for so many people. Like, it has destroyed lives.
Well, our logo, and I don't know if you've ever seen our logo, but it's basically just, it's a circle and it's a church that's split in half and it looks like it's sliding off of itself, in two pieces. And that's because we did it on purpose. It's because some people will look at what we do and they go, Church Disrupted, Spiritual Abuse Institute. They're just trying to tear down the church. And we would say, we're not trying to tear down the church. We're trying to take away the pieces and tear apart some of the things that are hurting people and making people run from the church in order to put back together the church that Jesus died for. But it's two ways of looking at it. And we have to have these hard conversations that are super duper uncomfortable, man, to get to that point. So again, I'm so glad that you're here because I think we're kindred spirits in a lot of this. But I thought that was important for people to know that your heart is not just to tear down the whole thing. Your heart is, man, you love Jesus. That is, even if you're not where you want to be, this is a part of your life that matters. And I think that heart is a great foundation place for people to see where you're coming from.
But there's also a sect of the church and the people that used to like me, and when I was a pastor, it was obvious, like, that don't think that what we do, when we call churches, or anybody who does this should be doing it. They think that the church is above reproach and should be, and it's not. The problem is that it might have used to be and it should be, but it's not. And the people that enable churches to act the way they do by allowing things to go unchecked, they're to blame. Like, I said something about Jesse Duplantis' church on X the other day, a long time ago. I just said, basically, at this point, his people that are giving him money they got to be held accountable to some degree too, because they know that this guy is basically, he's a charlatan, he's a heretic. There's nothing that is biblical coming out of this guy's church. He's absolutely, I'm sorry, and I could be a lot worse. But the people that who prop up mega church pastors, who give them all of their money and think that they're doing something good, that at some point they've got to hear the tough conversation that you need to be held accountable to for enabling this behavior.
Well, we think, we hear, like, the Bible talks about the church and church leaders, like especially elders, which were church leaders over cities at the time, that they should be above reproach. Above reproach doesn't mean irreproachable. Irreproachable means, hey, you're not allowed, touch not God's anointed, which is so taken out of context. You can't approach the church because it's the body of Christ. Above reproach means reproach all you want. It's just not going to hold water. Hey, we think you guys are misusing money. So, like, people come to us all the time and they're like, you guys are just in this for money. And we're like, okay, do you want to see our bank statements? Do you want to see what we made on social media? Do you want to see how much more this cost us than what we actually made? Like, we'll put it out there because, to me, that's above reproach. And there's a lot of churches who do live that way. There's more that don't live that way, right? So reproach is not a bad thing because it's an opportunity for the church to again remind people we're operating above reproach. We welcome the reproach because we can always give a good answer, for why we're doing these things.
Well, and they confuse their people who are loyal to them, which, again, consider this for a second. If you are loyal to a pastor, it's idolatry. Like, there's just no other way of putting this. If a pastor is preaching from the pulpit that, hey guys, there's the people out there trying to take us down, that's the devil, or that's us, that's spiritual warfare. If you are going to a church, and I know that nobody wants to hear this, but I'm going to tell it to you straight. If you are going to a church because of the way that the band is, there's a guy there that you like, the pastor that you like their message, inherently nothing super duper wrong with it. But at some level, you've got to talk to yourself. And you've got to say, am I going because this pastor? And if that's the case, you've got to understand that that's idolatry. If you are standing up for this guy amongst things that are happening inside of the church, if you're like, we don't care what the church has done wrong, you are idolizing something. And the problem with mega churches and churches in general, not all of them, I want to stress this because there are great churches out there. There are great leaders, and I know a bunch of them. Okay. But for the most part, I wouldn't say more than 80% of churches that they're operating out there are doing this wrong. And if people are out there going because of a person or the way that they speak, you're doing it wrong too. Because as a Christian, you are supposed to understand the Bible yourself. You are supposed to be taking it in, reading it yourself. And I'm not saying you'll have all the answers, but if you're just allowing some dude in skinny jeans on a stage to say, let's unpack this, okay, and not researching it or understanding it yourself, you're doing it wrong. And it's a pastor's responsibility to tell you to do that. And a lot of them won't.
Well, that's what the Apostle Paul said, right? He commended, when he was talking to the Thessalonians, I believe, he commended the Bereans above all else because the Bereans double checked everything that he taught them by scripture, right? So if the Apostle Paul expected people to check him, we should. Also, man, I agree. We made, we often make idols out of church leaders, and people are always going to come back. We get a lot of, well, there's no data to support that because people think there isn't, but there is actually data to support this. I know Carrie Newhoff has cited quite a few statistics recently, but the number one reason why people choose churches today in North America is because of the preaching of the pastor, right? And I think the second or third is because of music. But if we go back to the early church, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with music and bands, I love good worship music. There's nothing wrong with good preaching. I've done good preaching and I like good preaching. But if you go back to the early church, the first couple of 100 years of the church, there was no like one person in charge preaching. There was no band, one person, the group singing. It was, if we sing, we're all singing together without instruments, and multiple people prophesied, multiple people taught. So there wasn't idolatry because there were so many people involved. Now, if we build an entire 60-minute service and multi-million-dollar industry, I hate to say it, conglomerate business that's called a church on the back of, the talents of, a few singers, a few performers, and, a person who is really performing on stage. Because a lot of teaching, there's a lot of good teachers, but you've seen this. There's a lot of performers who are reading off of a teleprompter, a script that somebody else wrote for them because they're really good at delivery. When we do that, we have now made an idol out of this one person or these couple of people who are just really good at performing the gospel rather than us all living the gospel and wrestling with the gospel together. So while there's nothing wrong with that, I think there's some questions that we definitely got to ask to make sure that it doesn't become idolatry in our hearts.
Yeah. Ask you questions about your church. Is your church idolizing excellence? Is excellence above everything? And they'll say it. Some of them will unapologetically say, excellence above all. We want this to be perfect. So when you sit in your butt in the seat, you're like, this is perfect. That's ridiculous, first of all. Also, somewhere along the way, we let someone like Andy Stanley come along and say that the church corporation and the build it like a business, do it like a business was the way to do things. I was bought and sold. Okay. I went to the Drive conferences and I was bought and sold 100% into this type of thing. I'm not saying I was blind, but I was bought and sold because I thought there's whatever it takes to get an ass in that pew, I'm going to do it. And because they need to hear the message. And so if that means I got to sing a U2 song, or I got to do this and the other thing, I got to wear skinny jeans and I got to have the biggest LED screen and I got to have this type of DBs and this type of mixer and a $500,000 projector. If I have to have all these things, that's justifiable in my opinion to get a butt in that seat. When the truth is, it's really all you're doing is creating a space for a person who's leaving another church for a better church. And that's the reality of where we are right now. And I'm not sure the data supports this, but I'm going to say from my own experience, the growth that we saw at my church when I started there was from other churches. It wasn't new. It was maybe a couple of newbies, maybe 1%, but the majority of the growth came from other churches because I was bringing something new and exciting that they wanted. I was doing the Hillsong. I was doing the elevation style thing. I was doing what everyone doing, the tracks. I was doing what North Point taught us to do. And it was growing us, but it was only growing us people who are just leaving other places. And so at some point we took this we worship numbers. How many of your churches post the dang numbers from last week in your bulletins? Even go back as far as the early 1900s, you got churches with those little placards, the little wooden placards, and they say last week's numbers, right? We're obsessed with numbers when it should just be like, let God do what he's going to do. And if it works, it works.
Well, yeah, man, I was a part of that same system. I think we were probably at the Drive conferences around the same time. And then, I got to be a part of a mega church and run some of those systems. And at some point, you look around and you're like, this is just a lot of transfer growth coming from other churches. Man, all these people are being baptized. Wow. How many of them are being baptized for like the third or fourth time? Like what are,
Hmm.
and you have to start asking some of those questions. Again, there's people coming to Jesus in those churches. I believe that. But there's also a lot of growth in numbers we're celebrating that I don't know is really life change. Right.
Yeah.
So it's worth asking those questions. Now, so you were a pastor, you're in this world, you're doing really well. Your church is growing. You're part of a mega church in Canada, if I remember correctly. Kind of what happened that moved you out of the church? Because it was a pretty rough experience for you, and a journey that you've been healing from over the past few years.
Yeah, so I started at a smaller church. So I was in a rock band, Christian rock band, like most other worship pastors you've ever met. You just ask the worship pastor of your church if he was ever in a band. Okay, he was in a band. We went to the concerts with Skillet and DC Talk and Jars of Clay and all that. We grew up on these guys, and this is what I did. I was in a Christian rock band. I thought that's how my ministry was going to be, and we weren't super successful, but we were successful in my province in Ontario. Okay, we toured extensively. It was pretty fun. It was awesome. Then my wife's pregnant. I'm like, no more touring. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to subject my family to me not being there. And so the natural transition was as a musician to become a worship pastor, because we had been doing that anyway on the road. So I got a job at a small church. It's a great church. And to this day, that's the only pastor I still have respect for, was from that church to this day. The guy, I think he's independently wealthy. He doesn't need the church to make money. He's not the best speaker in the world, but he's a godly man, and has been the same since the day I met him. And he's the only person I still have to a degree, any respect for. So after that church, what pastors do, especially guys like me who are ambitious, the job is to get into another church, to find a bigger church, better church, because you want to like expand your skills. This church has maxed out its limitations as far as budget's concerned and as far as what it can do, and you want to take it to the next level. A lot of pastors who move around a lot, there are two reasons for that. One, you're ambitious. Two, you're burnt out and you want a different opportunity, and you're crazy, because there's no such thing as a church minister who's not going to eventually burn out. That's a side note, and maybe we can get back to that, but that's just the way the church treats people, and it's insane to me. So I get into this other church.
And can I add another reason real quick while
sure.
they move around?
Yeah.
It's because you burn out so much, but if you get really good at what you do, you can have a 3 to 4 year cycle doing the things I do and grow a church anywhere, grow a department anywhere. But if it goes past 3 or 4 years, you don't know what to do next. So you just hop and hop and hop and hop, because that's the only way to kind of sustain, is to have my shtick, to have my bag. But you're leaving these churches, and nobody knows what to do next. You didn't know what to do next, and then that growth's not sustainable.
And churches rarely build into the next section by teaching. They just like when I left, when I get to it, but I went to church, I built all the systems up that turned this place from, I think it's like 1,400 on a Sunday morning, to the time I left was like 20 by 1,000. In Canada, you have to understand, a 2,400 member church is absolutely bananas in this country. We are very liberal. We don't have a lot of mega churches. You can count the mega churches on 2 hands in Canada, in all of Canada. Okay. And what we do is these churches all go to each other's churches, and we learn from each other, and it's a good network of that type of thing. But in the US, my church would be considered small, I think. So all that to say, by the end of it, I was burned out. So I was burning candle at both ends, obviously, like every pastor does. I had multiple hats. They even hired a video guy that did that stuff, but I did that job too, because I was better than him at it. He was a good guy, but he just wasn't. I'm a unicorn when it comes to ministry, and I know there are a bunch of us that are out there. I'm not trying to float my boat. I just am a media unicorn. Okay, I'm very good at video production. I'm very good at music production. I'm very good at like graphic design. That's what I grew up doing. I'm just good at it, right? And so they see that you're good at something, and if you volunteer to do something one day, that now becomes who they rely on. And that's stupid. If I could tell anybody in ministry, getting into ministry these days, to do one thing is to hide the things that you are good at. Don't let them know. And I know that sounds really shady. Don't let them know. Do what you're hired to do. Stick to it, because if you show a strength somewhere else, they will absolutely exploit it.
Hey Disruptors, Jeff here with what is probably the worst sales pitch of all time. But at Church Disrupted and SAI, we don't have big donors, we don't have corporate sponsors, and we definitely don't want to sell out or try to sell you random stuff just to keep the ministry going. But what we do have is you, this community. Because the Spiritual Abuse Institute and the Church Disrupted podcast are 100% donor funded. And that means that we rely on people like you, listeners who care, survivors who get it, and advocates who just want to see the church do better. Now, last year, we came up short by about $2,500 every month. Now, the good news is our board made up the difference out of pocket. And listen, we were really glad to do it. But we also know that that's not sustainable in the long run. So this spring, we're launching the I Disrupt campaign to raise $2,500 a month in recurring donations. Because it's not about a few big checks or big donors. It's about a lot of us doing a little. You give as little as $5 a month, you're literally sponsoring the show. No matter how much or how little you give, you are investing in the long-term future of this work. So whether you give big or small, we want to pour back into you as well through things like monthly Zoom calls, early access to new resources, a private line to ask questions and to shape the content that you see here. And I'm really excited about being able to give you some links to join some of our weekly live streams and podcast recordings live, where you can ask questions right there live on the call. And you can find more information about the different ways we're giving back to our sponsors and recurring donors at spiritualabuse.institute or at the link below in the description. But if this podcast has ever encouraged you, challenged you, or made you feel seen, you can be a part of helping us continue this work and to do more than ever this year. Because here's the deal, we're not going to stop until spiritual abuse is rare and safe, accountable churches are the norm. So thank you for being a part of this with us, and thank you for helping us disrupt spiritual abuse and toxic church systems.
So they did that to me. At one point, I think in my video, I said I worked something like 100 and some odd hours week before Christmas Eve. I didn't get to see my family for a week. Christmas, a pastor doesn't get to celebrate Christmas with their family anymore. Okay. It's like, that's not going to happen. Your traditions are out the window. You're working the biggest, because your Christmas Eve service is the biggest thing your church is ever going to do. And likely because that's because everybody's coming out who goes to church twice a year. So I understand the reason why, but I had burned out to a point where I said, hey guys, can I go part-time, get a different job, and just do the job you hired me for? And they said, no. They said, I'm not allowed to do it. Part of my contract was not allowed to get another job. A lot of these churches will lock you into weird constricting contracts because they don't want to share you with other people. I get it, because they want to take every ounce of your blood, sweat, and tears for themselves. They're greedy. That's just all there is to say. I'm sorry, there's no other way to put it.
Well, 130 hours a week, bro. That's not sustainable for anybody.
And it wasn't.
I had to do that a few times around conferences, but it takes you 6 months to fully get back after that.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to bounce back, and they need you to be bounced back and then be the regular person. So I had adopted 2 of my nephews at that point, and the finalization of adoption in Canada, you're allowed. Canada, like, this is the best part of Canada as far as I'm concerned. We get parental leave. Both parents can get it, right? And you get up to 18 months of parental leave, federally protected parental leave. You can take your job, say, hey, look, I have had this kid, or I've adopted this kid. I'm taking 18 months off, and there's nothing they can do about it. Okay. It's just nothing they can do. So I decided, since they weren't going to let me take a leave, they're not even entertaining. I'm like, guys, I'm burning out here. I need help. And they just don't give it. They're like, sorry. So I said, okay, I have this federally protected leave. I can take this. Did I need it? Probably not. They were pretty young, but they weren't babies. But I did it because that was the only answer I had to keep my job and to take break. So I took my federally protected leave. And while I was on leave, they decided to call me back in for a meeting and to see, we want you to go back to Bible college. We want you to do all these kinds of things. I'm like, what, am I not effective for you? Like my question was to them, like, what do you think me going back to Bible college is going to do? Do you want me to be a pastor? Like, because I'm not going to preach, even though I can, I'm not going to do it. That's not what my gifting is. I'm not going to do it. So they were looking to, in my opinion, they were looking to figure out ways to like boot me out by me leaving. And so they're making it hard. First of all, when you're on federally protected leave in Canada, you do not have to go back into your job. They can't force you to come in for meetings. They can't force you to work. And I'm like, I'm on leave. Leave me alone, basically. Right. And it was around this time too, right before I took the leave, that I was asking questions. Like we had launched a satellite campus, and it went over $150,000 over budget. And my budget got frozen. A bunch of other people's budgets got frozen because they were mismanaging the money, in my opinion. And I started asking the questions at these meetings because I'm I'm a lead pastor. That's what I was considered at this church, even though I was a worship pastor. Okay. I was on the leadership team and I'm allowed to ask these questions. But because I was asking these questions, they were getting very upset with me. And I wasn't doing it in a rude way. I wasn't being a Karen with a purple haircut and the fisheye glasses. I wasn't doing any of that stuff. I was just asking questions like, hey guys, my budget's been frozen. I'd like to know where that $150,000 went. Is someone being held accountable? Are these contractors taking us to the cleaners? What's going on over here? Didn't answer the questions, but that's when I started taking my leave. And in my opinion, that's when they were done with me. So they brought me back for a meeting, but about a month before I was supposed to come back to work. And I had a feeling something was going to happen. So I put a recorder in my pocket, and where I live, it's one party consent. I'm allowed to record the conversation as long as I consent to it. And I recorded it. And I told my wife before I left for that meeting, I said, I'm getting fired today. And she's like, there's no way. My wife is such a sweetheart. Okay. She is like, she always roots for the underdog. She is way better than me in every single way, but she's like, there's just no way they're going to do that. You're being crazy. I'm like, okay, go in, record the meeting, and you can hear it on my channel. I have it up. They fire me and they're like, look, it's just not a good fit anymore. We think this, that, and the other thing. And then during the meeting, they lied. I said, look, it's going to be hard for me to find another job if you guys fire me. They're like, look, we won't tell anybody we fired you. We'll even make it so you can get employment insurance, which is EI, which is what you get in Canada if you get laid off. Like, they were willing to lie just so that they look good, because churches don't want anybody to tell you why. Like, if you ever a part of a church where someone gets fired, note the secrecy around it. That's the craziest part to me. Why can't you just be transparent with it? Because when they released their statement about why I was no longer coming back, it was a lie. And so I released the recording, and they were super, super duper upset with it. And because as soon as I got fired too, I filed a human rights lawsuit in Canada. You just file a human rights tribunal. And I filed them like, you guys fired me while I was on parental leave. That's illegal. Regardless of the reasons you did it, you cannot fire me while I'm on federally protected leave. And of course I won. But then they didn't know I had the recording. And so before I released the recording, I messaged them and said, look, you guys put out this statement in the church that was a lie. I have this recording that is calling out your lies. Can we sit down and talk about this? And instead of, because I did it the biblical way, so instead of them responding in a biblical way, which a church should do, they called, I told you this, it was during the playoffs finals where the Raptors won. I got a call from my lawyer panicking that their lawyer had called my lawyer, and they were freaking out about this whole thing. And so instead of taking accountability about their lies, I just had to hold them to their lies. And so that sparked, it wasn't even being fired from a church. Okay. Because I wasn't fired for being bad at my job. I was very good at my job. And in the recording, you can hear them say, you're basically the best we've ever seen at this job. So it wasn't because of that.
What was their reasoning for firing?
Fit was no longer a fit. That was it. You can hear it. Them say the words. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, we just don't think that but basically they don't want to say it. I'm asking hard questions.
That's Greek for you ask questions we don't like. You didn't get
I took leave. They were upset that I took leave, and they were, this is their way of getting back at me. It was super petty. It was disgusting. And so that's why I won the lawsuit, because they can't fire you while on leave, no matter for what reason. They could have had legit reasons. They still couldn't have fired me when I was on leave. So that was what I took away from it. They
probably couldn't have fired you like legally. It would have been hard to fire you within the next 6 months without legitimate reasons, because it would look like retaliation, which I mean is what it was.
It was retaliation, and they just wanted to, they didn't want me coming back, getting people used to the way I was doing things again, and then fire me, because then they would cause more stir. They thought because I'd been gone for 6 months already that they just cut it and I won't come back, and everybody's like, no, that wasn't the way it was. Man, did this set off a storm that they did not see coming, and I'm glad it did. Honestly, I'm glad it did, because churches need to be held accountable for the lies and the stuff that they tell. And I said this on my channel in the video. I said 10 reasons why you should leave your church. One of the main reasons you should leave your church, and anybody out there listening to this podcast, if your church has one non-disclosure agreement in its files, one, I don't care what it's for, leave your church. And I'll stand by that to the rest of, unless I'm missing something, maybe you'll have something for me, but there is no reason a church should be silencing anybody legally. That's not only are they taking the church's money to hire lawyers, and very expensive lawyers, to fight this kind of stuff. That's your money. That's your tithing money that they're using to scare the absolute crap out of somebody into silence. Okay. But if we are as Christians, I cannot believe that we're allowed as nonprofit organizations, especially religious, to not disclose what we spend our money on. Why would you not want to be transparent? There are churches, and I love that your organization does this, that you're transparent, because you're setting an example that needs to be set. And some churches do this, but not my church. And the funniest part about this whole thing is 2 weeks after this, my video went and all this kind of stuff, or something like that, they sent me an email by accident with literally a list of what everybody gets, all the salaries of each pastor. And I don't know why they did it. They were in panic
It
mode.
was a huge mistake. They don't want that
Huge mistake.
information out because you didn't get that information when you were on the leadership team of the
No,
church.
I didn't know
That's
what
like one or two people know that, period.
And like the thing that pissed me off the most about all this kind of stuff is that it's just the unfairness in churches, right? I've been working there for 2 years, and they brought in another campus pastor. And if you know anything about a campus pastor, I'm sorry for campus pastors out there. I'm not sure I'm sorry. You're a babysitter. You are literally a babysitter of the campus. Like, you could hire a manager, but this guy comes on and gets paid like gets double vacation, and I'm here working my ass off. And I'm sorry. When you're not fair, you're sowing that within your community, and I don't care. You just got to be fair. So that's one big reason. If the church has an NDA, leave. And my church, the funniest, craziest part about this is, as I was releasing this in my podcasts, and I wasn't that big of a channel, 10 people before me who were all fired by the same pastor, his name's Chris, all fired. Similar reasons, the not fit thing, they all signed non-disclosure agreements, and I had lunch with every single one of them. And they were like, Josh, thank you. They were saying to me, thank you so much for putting this out there, because you're telling the truth that we were not allowed to tell.
And again, man, that's why I say we're kindred spirits. And you know, there are people who are going to say, well, Jeff, that happened to Josh. Maybe that happened to you. That doesn't happen everywhere. Guys, this has become more often than not standard practice in churches. That's why we talk about that so often. And I love that you brought it up, because I know some of our listeners are probably like, God, Jeff, why do you talk about NDAs so much? Because they are so insidious. We still have people, man, you know, it's been years. And I still had someone message me the other day on social media, and they're like, you just need to get over your church hurt, you know, giving me all these things. Like, they couldn't understand why I was upset about the NDA and everything else. And I just asked the question. I was like, hey, have you ever wondered why out of the hundreds of staff members who had left before me, in the decade before me, why none of them came to the church's aid or spoke against what we said? It's because, one, they're silenced from saying anything that could hurt the church, even if it's, you know, liking a post, this, that, or the other. Two, they support what we're doing, because so many of them messaged us. Like, when my wife and I published the NDA we were asked to sign and said, we don't think this is right, we're not going to sign this, we had so many former staff members do the same thing and go, Jeff, thank you. We wish we hadn't have signed it. We felt like we had to take care of our family, which I totally get. We were just, and my wife and I, man, we don't think we're better than anybody else. We were just, God put us in this weird, unique position where at that moment, money was really good. I had been, you know, running a business and things were going really well. So it was like, hey, we don't need the money. And if you're going to try to buy our silence, that was the sad part. It was like, if you're going to try to buy our silence, you should really spend more money. Like, this isn't enough for my integrity. Like,
But think
you know,
about, sorry, I have to interrupt you there. Think about how disgusting it is, though, for churches to take advantage of somebody who needs to feed their family by saying, you know what, we're going like that, that's satanic. I'm sorry, there's no other way of putting it. There's like absolutely bollocks that they do that, and they know that they have that pressure on someone and they use it instead of just being fair about it all. And like, I'm going to go back to one thing you said. Think of all the people that have left your church. How many go to your church? How many still go? And maybe there is a couple that did stay because they did retire, they did want to leave, and they just didn't want the pressure of that. Maybe that does happen, but that's very rare. How many of those people go somewhere else? How many of those people want nothing to do with your church anymore? That should speak volumes to you.
Well, almost every staff member who left that church, they would say, oh, hey, they love this church. They're leaving for good reasons. It was always good reasons. It was always fun. They're still going to be a part of our church. Yeah. And then 6 months later, you're like, I haven't seen that person like in our church. They don't seem to be involved in anything that we're doing. And of course, there's exceptions to that. But if you look, what happens to church staff when they leave your church? What's said about them? If the narrative's always good and nobody ever got fired and nobody's ever hurt when they left, we're hiding something, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of these lies that get told, Josh, like the examples you gave, they're lies that are baptized in reasoning and excuses of, well, we're just trying to protect you, mm-hmm. right? And I'll tell you, just because, again, you know, we've had similar experiences. I had already left the church, left on my own, but my wife got fired. And two of the main reasons why she got fired was, one, she recorded a staff meeting that was actually recorded. It was going to come out later. Okay. She recorded it before it came out. Wanted to make sure that the reasoning that was given to staff for, you know, a pastor, a longtime pastor there, campus pastor who got fired, she wanted to make sure that she had that she had the right, you know, to be able to tell other people the right things they said. And if lies were told later, she wanted to be able to have that to go, hey, that's not what you said, right?
Mhm.
Hoping there's no lies told. Okay. But as long as that was going to be on the recording, it wouldn't have been an issue anyway. She just recorded it just in case they cut off that last announcement, right?
Mhm.
Um, so she got fired because of the recording. And then they gave her the other reason was because of me. Because when that pastor, that campus pastor, got fired a few weeks before that, he was completely surprised. He posted on social media, "Hey, this came as a surprise to us. We're still praying for the church." Said all the good things, and all I said was, "Man, I'm so sorry. It should never come as a surprise when someone gets fired in a church. Like you should know it's coming. You should have had an opportunity to fix it. That's poor leadership, and I'm so
Mhm.
sorry." And because I said that's poor leadership, and she recorded something, not really even trying to hide it, that's why she got fired. We're
Explain
so
to me.
scared of somebody recording a
Yeah.
conversation and a former pastor going, "That's bad leadership," and I still stand by it today. It's
Yeah.
bad leadership. If you can't handle me saying that wasn't right, then your skin is not thick enough to be in ministry.
Well, they think that you have a spy inside. That's all they're doing. But explain to me, she records it. Which anyway, anybody out there in ministry right now, do yourself a favor and record your meetings, because I have ADHD and I can't remember anything anyway. But record your meetings. But did they then omit something, and that's how they found out she had the recording? So how did they find out she had the recording? Did they actually omit the thing that she's scared they were going to omit?
No, from best she can tell, it was an anonymous source, but she believes it was someone else who sat at her table because she wasn't really trying to hide it. She just pulled out her
Oh,
phone,
okay.
clicked the record button. Somebody else at her table told them, and they started this whole process. They asked her, "Did you record it?" And she said, "Yes, absolutely, I recorded it." And they said, "Why'd you record it?" And she told them, "This is why I recorded that." Right? She gave them multiple reasons, and all of the reasons were valid. And then 2 days later, she was fired, and I was like, "They're gonna fire you." And she came home and she's like, "They're not going to fire me. Like, they're not going to fire me for recording that. What is wrong with doing that?" And
How
she was
dumb
like,
could they be?
that she was like your wife. She had stayed when I left after seeing all these things because she believed the church could turn around, man. She wanted the best for this church. And then it's like, well, dang, yeah, they fired me. So and none of that. I don't want to throw shade at the church that I was at, so I'm not using their name. You don't want to throw shade necessarily. Maybe you do, but our goal is not throwing shade at these churches. But the point is that's not these behaviors are not unique to that church you
Yeah.
were at or the church I'm at. I see the NDAs. People send them to me from all over the United States, man, from churches all over. So if your church is using an NDA, and the only time that we tell people, so like our Safe Church Pledge, Josh, I'd love for you to look at it. We ask churches to take 16 safe commitments to transparency, accountability, and protective measures. One of them is we won't use NDAs. We
Hmm.
do give allowances, NDAs that are very specific, protect the parishioners. So if one said, "Hey, as a pastor, you're going to see donation information. You're not allowed to share that," and you
Hmm.
commit that you won't share that, right? We'll allow for that, but no non-disparagement, no other broad clauses. And the same thing is, hey, you're going to have some counseling, with people. You're not going to share anything outside of mandated reporting that people tell you in counseling because that's in
Makes
confidence.
sense.
And those things, we shouldn't have to have NDAs for them because, like, my wife's a therapist, so there's laws for therapists and doctors and people
Yep.
like that on all of that stuff. So if we would just put some common practices in place for church staff, we wouldn't have to do that. The other thing that churches say is they say, well, we want to protect against defamation and slander and gossip and all that. There are already laws on the books
Yep.
that protect against that. Those non-disparagement clauses aren't protecting against defamation, slander, libel. They're protecting against people saying true things
Truth.
that would hurt the reputation of the church, right? And that's totally different. So I did want to give that nuance. We do allow for some uses of NDAs, but they have to be very specific because at the end of the day, even if they are very specific and they're not bad, it's such a bad look for a church when an NDA comes out. It's not worth using, in my opinion.
No, I agree with you, and that's I didn't even think of that. There would be disclosure agreements when it comes to, like, I get that, and that makes sense to me. The non-disclosure agreements that I'm talking about are ones where you got fired. We don't want you disparaging us. We don't want you saying anything about this. And then your church, you should be like, hey, look, if you're above reproach, then when someone reproaches you, then you're like, look, we got this all covered. We got it all done. They don't want that. The thing about my church is that they blatantly lied. Like, they absolutely lied in their statement. I put it in my video. I put their statement next to the recording, and I said, they're lying to you. And that pastor, since his left, they forced him into retirement, and they just went to another church. So it's just like bad cops. They just go to another place. They don't give a crap. But I want to talk one quick thing that you touched on, is that some people get so upset about when people like us call it church. And this is becoming more and more of a thing. as it should. Like, this is the corrective nature of what I think God is in a season of corrective nature, and I think he's using people that have been hurt by the church to do it. And that's great. I think it's bad for the people that get hurt, but at the same time, I don't think there's any reason. I got this from a bunch of people from my old church. You're just hurt. So yeah, sure am. So are you telling me because I'm hurt, I'm not allowed to talk about this? Or am I coming from a place of rawness and visceral like anger that this is, I mean, that's the time when I think I'm the most honest. I'm upset about something and I'm going to come out and say it. And yeah, I'm hurt. You're damn right I'm hurt about it. And I'm allowed to talk about why I'm hurt about this. I mean, we talk about this in churches all the time. You get people coming. We want imperfect. We want the hurt. This is a hospital for sinners, not a, country club for saints. This is what they tell you. But as soon as you're hurt by the church and you come out, there's all these judgmental who are out there saying, oh, why you just hurt? You're damn right I'm hurt. And I should be allowed to say what I'm allowed to say because I am hurt. This church hurt me and millions of other people. Like, I'm saying millions. They're in the States and Canada. The ministry is a massive machine. Billions and billions of dollars run through this massive machine. When that kind of money and power run through any organization, it's inherently going to be corrupt. That's politics. And churches are many microcosm countries or like states of their own with their own politics inside and their own leadership battles. And it's really how this works. And so when you're hurt by that and people get upset with you for being hurt, I just want to tell those people to shut their pie holes because that's ridiculous.
Well, and that's the reason why, because man, I don't think there's anything wrong with a big church. I struggle because I think the bigger a church gets, the more intentional you have to be to keep what the church is supposed to be from the first century, right? But I don't think big churches are inherently bad. But the bigger you get, the more money's coming through, the more political it is, the more you have to fight for accountability and transparency. Because if you don't, it's going to go sideways, right? So the most transparent churches need to be the biggest churches. The bigger you are, the more transparent you need to be, right? And I'll have people say that, and a lot of times when people talk about spiritual abuse or church hurt, they just want to put it like I had a person do it the other day. They put it in quotes. You need to get over your church hurt, right? And I'm like, oh, do you mean my complex PTSD?
Yeah.
I'm not going to apologize for like clinical trauma that I've spent years and a lot of money having to heal from. No, let's call it what it is. Let's not call it church hurt. Yes, people are speaking out because people are getting so often they're getting somewhere between significant trauma and PTSD responses from religious trauma. So much so that the psychology world is looking at putting religious trauma in the next DSM as a clinical diagnosis, right? So we can put it in quotes and make it cute and call it church hurt, or we can say, no, people are leaving the body of Christ, because the Bible, Josh, the Bible doesn't ever describe the church as a machine of ministry. It describes it as the body of Christ. And you can bet your tail. If I'm hurting, something in my body is hurting, even if it's not life or death, I'm going to go to the doctor and I'm going to figure out what the heck that is, right? We should be able to go to the doctor as a church and go, whoa, parts of our body are hurting. Like they are getting traumatized. We need to bring healing to that, because what do we call a body that is being infected and harming itself, right? We call that cancer. And anybody in their right mind is going to go say, hey, we got to treat this cancer. Yet in the body of Christ, we slide an NDA over and go, well, we don't want to hurt the reputation of the church, so don't let anybody know we're sick. And then by trying to protect the reputation of the church, we're allowing hundreds and thousands of other people to go through the same thing behind closed doors.
If you leave cancer unchecked, what's going to happen? It turns into stage 4 and you're going to die. So the issue here is that, and I also want to just make sure that we are leaving room for churches who do need to get rid of toxic people, because this does happen too. Like I had toxic people that worked. I'm like, thank God they're gone. Church does do its due diligence in some ways. There's a lot of sexual abuse that goes on in churches, and churches are really, really quick now to be like on it, which is good. Some of them are still catching up, obviously, as we're seeing from 20, 30 years ago. I think once, and I know this sounds ageist, I'm not trying to be, but once we get this boomer generation outside of these leadership positions in churches, I think we're going to see a change. And I'm not talking about an ideology change or a biblical change as far as the gospel is concerned. I think the churches that are going to survive this big moment are going to be the smaller churches that unapologetically preach the gospel, and that don't care about the bells and the whistles. And I think you're seeing this new wave of this new generation is like, I don't want North Point. I don't want Elevation. I don't want Hillsong. Hillsong, I mean, I'd like, you could have a whole podcast on the Hillsong. That's a cancer that was left unchecked, that went permeated through it. And they got so powerful. That cancer got so powerful, which was the leaders of the church and his family. They got so powerful that they got lazy and they destroyed that church from within. And now they're just starting another church. You got Mark Driscoll starting other churches and still having a voice where he is. You got people like Andy Stanley, who I, to some degree, I agree with. So maybe we'll leave him out of this, but you got too many of the wealth and prosperity that came out from this new thing. And it is the cancer of all the churches, but it's the biggest part of the cancer. And we don't see it because they are cultish to the degree where they're like, nobody can talk about us because it's just the devil. Right. But if you don't, I'll say this as the whole thing of the cancer. If your pastor lives in a $17 million mansion and drives multiple cars and wears $15,000 shoes and $50,000 watches and is a millionaire, I don't care if they take a salary or not from the church, but if they have that kind of money and there are people in your church who are living in poverty, leave the church.
Well, and you have this is not, your average church, right? But you do have a lot of leaders at the top who will say that, hey, I don't even take a salary from the church. No, but where does your money come from? Your money's coming from speaking engagements,
Yep.
and your money's coming from book sales. So when you were on the New York Times bestseller list, how many copies of the 10,000 that were required, how many copies did your church buy? How many copies are still on pallets somewhere in a storage unit or have been thrown away in the church?
Mm-hmm.
You've also got to ask this question, and Julie Roys did a great job a couple of years ago of breaking down some documents from Hillsong and what was called the celebrity preacher scam. And you would see that a lot of these guys that say, I'm going to go speak at my buddy's church and my buddy's conference, and somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000 at most of these is what they were getting paid to preach per pop. Well, I'm going to go preach at your church. You come preach at mine. I preach at your event. You come preach at mine. So that money is still coming from the church because guess what? We're paying that money out, not in a salary.
Mm-hmm.
We're paying this big money out in honorariums to our pastor's buddies, right? So there's a lot of money that's changing hands. And some of these really big pastors can say, I don't even take a salary. Well, no, but you made hundreds of thousands of dollars, much of it tax-free from the church.
And let's not forget, I love the fact that clergy do get this and that the tax breaks that churches get. To some degree, though, I think that the bigger churches that are doing these things where they're having multi-million-dollar productions, where they're buying new sound systems every 2 years, LED walls, and they're changing their stage design, I think there's got to be some accountability to some degree where if you reach a certain echelon in ministry, it's time to start paying some taxes, or at least show me that you're giving at least that money that you would pay in taxes to your community or to missions or whatever. Because let's be real. And this is another thing that I woke up to, and I was forced, and I say this, I was voluntold that I needed to go on a mission trip for my church because they wanted me to make a documentary about what we were doing over there. I'm glad I went. I'm just saying the $25,000 it cost to send us there could have been much more useful by hiring local people to do the things that they needed to do, right? Instead of sending a bunch of teenagers over there who didn't know how to hold a hammer to build something they had no business building and doing things. And I understand that. Let's just be real about it. Don't say that's missions when it's just a kid going over there and soaking in a different culture, which is good. Okay. Just don't lie about it.
It's a service experience.
It's a service experience. And that's what you should call it. Don't be like, oh, we're doing missions. You know what, man? Again, send the $25,000 over. It's going to have a 10 times bigger impact than sending a bunch of teenagers over who are then going to go on a safari afterwards. But this type of thing that goes on in churches permeates in every part of it. I want to talk, I wrote this down. I want to talk about the waste in churches. You need to ask this question in your church. How much waste is going on? Like, I'm not saying at one point I got a pushback for feeding my worship team. I had 100 worship volunteers under me at one point, 5 worship teams, 3 on a Sunday, playing multiple services. I had a big team and I'm like, hey, look, they're coming at 6:00 in the morning. I got to give them some muffins and some coffee and some breakfast. This is expensive, but it's worth it. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the things are like, okay, why do you need a new sound system? Is yours broken? Right? Why do you need the newest fancy dancy projector? Why do you need a $500,000 playground in your church for children to come? And they'll say, this is what they'll say to you. Well, we got a weekly ministry. The church that I came from, they spent $250,000 on an indoor playground. Don't get me wrong, it's really cool, and it's a lot of the reason that people bring their families. But they justified it by saying, "Oh, we're going to open it up to this weekly thing." Do you know how many times they open that playground up a week? One. Do you know how many people come? Maybe six. Maybe they rent it out for birthday parties and stuff, and I get that. But it's not. The churches justify spending enormous amounts. I'm talking millions and millions in waste by saying this is how we do ministry. When your community is struggling and you could literally lift probably a large percentage of your church population inside your church that has been loyal to your church, lift them out of poverty, at least teach them how to get out of poverty. But here's what happens. When the church needs money, they will relentlessly beg for it in every single way, Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, until they get that building, right? Until they get that upgrade, until they get that new, whatever they need, new chairs, right? But if you need something from the church, well, we'll pray. Let's pray, right? And some churches will do a little bit. Oh, here's $100 gift card. But like, come on, it is not equal. And a lot of churches will use their church to go to the community. Like, we do a backpack drive. We're gonna send these 150,000 backpacks to these kids in the low income. But the church takes all the credit for it. But they're getting the people inside the church to fill the backpacks, put them in a bin. The church delivers them on a pallet, right? The church is not spending what it needs to spend on the community. And if here's one more thing. Sorry, I know I'm ranting. I did a video on the church and its pro-life stance. Okay. And I say the church should have a pro-life stance. That's biblical in every single way. But the church doesn't have a pro-life stance after the baby's born often. But there was one church that did this, that I almost took a job in Florida. It was crazy. Can't believe the salary of this job, by the way. But what attracted me to this church initially after the interview was they had a building in the back. It was just it was just a square building, looked like a large building. And I said, "What's that for?" He said, "This is what we do. When mothers choose life, we say, you can bring your child here, free daycare. We're going to help you find a job. You need a car? We're going to help you get a car. You need to learn how to spend money, how to save money. We're going to teach you financing. We're going to take care of this so you can go work because you chose life. We're going to choose to help you." And now imagine every church in the US and Canada had a building like that in their parking lot. Could you imagine the impact it would have on just the pro-life stance? But giving groceries, diapers, clothing. And I know there's places that do it, but every church took 1%, 2%. It wouldn't even take much. It would have the biggest impact in that social area. And nobody would ever be able to say anything bad ever against the church just by doing that one tiny thing.
Well, then when you're doing that, you're pro-life throughout the child's life. You're making sure that that baby's not just born, but the baby's born into a life that is healthy and that matters. And, that looks so much more like Acts 2, where the believers were sharing all their possessions to make sure that nobody had a need, right? Which we got to be careful. Some things like Acts 2, if you talk about them today, people just want to throw out, "Oh, well, you guys must be socialist." Well, no, that's just, Scripture's countercultural. Scripture is not going to align with capitalism or socialism or anything else, because the kingdom operates on a different mindset, right?
Yeah.
I think we have a hard time sometimes, Josh, even looking at the things that Jesus said, because they rub our own politics wrong. And it's like, hey, Jesus wants us to be the church, to be his hands and feet, his body on this planet, so that people, when they come in contact with us, they go, "God, it's like I got a glimpse of Jesus." It's like the woman who got to touch his robe. I touched his robe, and just that little bit of his robe, just by coming in contact with these sinful, screwed up people who are called by his name, I got healed. Right? When we do that, man, people flock to Jesus. And so many times, like, I've heard this said, for a long time, but it's so true. The way you win people to a church is going to be the same thing you have to do to keep them. So if we're winning them with entertainment, and we're winning them with these big events, and we're winning them with playgrounds, well, then the only way we're going to keep them in any sort of discipleship relationship is through events and playgrounds and everything else. And that doesn't actually allow us to grow people and challenge people to be the church. So sometimes I think we got to ask, butts and seats, does it matter if they're not being truly converted and discipled? Because then we're getting a lot of people who think, "Hey, I'm on my way to heaven because I prayed a prayer, I raised my hand, I got baptized again." And it's like, well, are you? Right? And at some point we have to ask, are we doing more damage by bringing people in this, doing whatever it takes? Craig Rochelle's will do whatever it takes, anything short of sin, to lead people to Jesus. Well,
yeah,
if we're doing anything short of sin, are we making sure we're actually leading them to Jesus and discipling them after? So I want to ask you this. You talked about NDAs. You talked about waste. And I've seen both of those. What are some other things? Let's just peel back the curtain. What are some other things that the average Christian needs to be asking questions about that they may not know happens often in churches, that would help us to be more transparent, more healthy, more safe?
I mean, hiring practices are a big deal. How are they picking people? Is there a lot of this is the thing I hate in churches. It's I keep forgetting the name of what when you hire like a family member. What's that called?
Nepotism.
Yeah, nepotism is a huge problem in churches. I think, especially one of the questions I often ask is like, for me, nepotism just I feel like it's greedy. But I think a lot of pastors think that the churches are theirs, and they think that the next generation of their children are going to be the ones who take it over. That's a huge red flag. If your church is doing that, that's a massive red flag. And now, don't get me wrong, some people are as talented or better than their parents. You got Andy Stanley is a good example of this. It does happen, right? But for the most part, like, let's be real. I have another question too. A lot of the times, how does your leadership run? How are they held accountable when someone brings something up to the church? How is it taken care of? Are they, again, transparency is the biggest thing. Go to your church and ask them what salaries your pastors make. And when they say no, and they're going to say no, ask them why, right? What happens if your church goes under? Who stands to gain from when a church goes under? Who gets the property? Who owns the building and the things inside of it? These are questions a lot of us don't answer. There's a lot of hidden stuff. Nobody really wants to know how the sausage is made in church. And those who do are the ones who end up leaving it. When the scales finally fall off your eyes when it comes to understanding how churches are operated and run, for the most part, you are more apt to be the person that's leaving. And that's, I think a lot of Christians need to go through this. And I know that sounds really weird, but I think a lot of Christians need to start going through and start asking questions, because, again, I'll say this, you at some point are going to be held accountable for your decisions that you made. And if you know that somebody is making a bad choice or doing something wrong, and you continue to pay them to be in that position, like, again, we talk about Jesse Duplantis, and who's the other guy there she approached him about his plan, and he looked like Satan. What was his name?
That was Copeland, I think.
Copeland.
Copeland.
If you are a member of these churches, who's the guy in Florida with the Miami Stadium? I can't, man.
Yeah, I can't remember that one, but they're a dime a dozen, man.
Yeah, I mean, they're everywhere.
Remember all of them.
If you are going to a church like this and the world knows that this is heresy, and it is, again, it's so simple. And I'm not saying to be wealthy is wrong. I'm not saying that. I'm saying to be a pastor and to be obscenely wealthy is wrong. I know that sounds, but if you are a pastor and you're obscenely wealthy, you're doing it wrong. You are doing ministry wrong. I'm not saying you need to be a pauper and you need to live in a van down by the river, but I'm saying there is a difference, a line. There is absolutely a line. You got into ministry for a reason, and the reason why you continue to stay means more to me than what you're doing, what you're preaching. At some point, you've got to understand that these guys are greedy, and they know that they are idolized, and they're okay with it.
Yeah, man. And I always want to be clear, like, we've got pastors on our board. I was a pastor for a long time. We have zero problem when churches choose to pay their pastors. And if you're going to pay pastors, pay them fairly. They should be able to afford to live in the community they're doing ministry in, right? So we're not preaching a poverty gospel here, right? But there is a line. Let's pay them fairly. They don't need to be poor, and they don't need to live a lavish lifestyle that doesn't match their community, right? So we can take care of pastors. We can pay them fairly without it going crazy. I also think, Josh, there are so many good churches that people aren't going to because they don't have the excellence in the performance and this, that, or the other. Yet, man, they know you and they disciple you and they love you, and you begin to experience what church was designed to be, right? So as we ask these questions, it does two things. One, all of the churches that are not transparent and accountable, our goal with the Safe Church Pledge is not to point at a bunch of churches and go, oh, you guys aren't doing it right, don't go to those churches. Our goal is to get even big churches that go, it's going to be weird if we don't answer these questions. So let's just be transparent and accountable, right? And look, even at a mega church, I'll be honest, and I live in the Southeast, so cost of living is a little less than some places. But the most I ever made in ministry was $55,000 a year. Okay, that counted my housing allowance. So I never had a problem telling people what I made. Okay, the only times we want to hide what people make is when we think, that may be too much for them.
What are the optics? What are the optics of that?
Yeah. But at least in the United States, secular nonprofits have to do that all the time. And the worst thing that happens is you'll have someone who says, I don't want to give to that because I think they're spending too much money on their, top 5 salaries or whatever. So, one, when we ask these questions, it allows us to have good conversations with churches who maybe aren't in the safest place yet, but through these conversations, transparency, accountability, we all get better. Okay.
Yep.
The other thing, though, it exposes the ones that refuse. Because if they refuse to have these conversations with you or vilify you or make you feel bad for asking these questions, it has shown you it's an unhealthy place. It's shown you it's a dangerous place. Okay. You got to ask why. Don't just jump straight to that, but say, hey, help me understand why you're not answering these questions. Help me understand what you're scared
Mhm.
of, right?
Mhm.
We want to do this with empathy. And then the last thing it does is it allows the churches that are willing to be transparent and accountable to actually be propped up, where we go, hey, did you know there's churches who are already doing this stuff? Like they don't have anything to hide. So I don't think anybody loses when we are transparent and accountable as a church, except for the ones who are hiding things they shouldn't
Mhm.
be hiding and hurting people who don't need to be hurt, right?
Excellent
So
point.
everybody else wins.
Yeah, there it is. Keep it simple. For me, simple is the best. Occam's razor is the best. Who stands to lose the most? And are they in the decision making spot of that church? Like at my church, what hurt me, the one of the things that hurt me the most was my wife was working for one of the realtors that was an elder on the board, and was basically lying to my wife through this whole process. And to stay on the board after, and this woman thinks that she's a good woman. That's the thing. The thing that bothers me the most about some of these people is that they honestly think that they're doing okay. And when they're approached with the reality of what they're doing to people, they don't see it. That's dangerous. Okay, so when you're holding your church accountable for some reason, and the people that this is how you do it. The people that are coming at you the most have the most to lose. Okay, so if someone is trying to silence you for a reason, they're the person that we should be speaking out against the most. They need to be gone, because a church is not going to clean up that healthy is not going to get healthy unless they remove the toxicity inside the church. And the toxicity is usually can be down to one or two people. There's usually in a church with a lot of staff, there's always a no man. There's a pastor I call him a no man. He's usually executive pastor who's not good at preaching, but he's good at running day-to-day business. That's the no man. He's the guy that gets in front of people and says, no, no. Someone comes, they want groceries, or they need help. No, they're unapologetically okay with being like, piss off. We don't want you here, but they do it in a nice way. And they're good at it, right? There's that guy. That role inside of a church does not need to exist. Okay, it should hurt to give. Okay, it should hurt. How many of you, of anybody who listens to the podcast who goes to church, how many of your churches ask you to give till it hurts, but don't give till it hurts? Because don't forget, the church is an entity that has a bunch of money coming in, and they're paying probably 60% plus for salaries alone, which, again, don't get me wrong, pay a pastor what they're worth. Let people work a living wage. They're doing a good job. They're working for the Lord. They should be paid. Okay. But at the same time, where's the extra 40% going? Where is that going? Are you only interested in building satellite churches? How about this? Instead of building a satellite church, which you don't need, why don't you take some of that money and give it to a church that doesn't have a lot of money, help them get bigger and better over there, right? Why are we against each other? Why are we not building up other churches? Because maybe they have a little bit of theology difference? No, 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 no. See, churches are becoming franchised like McDonald's, and there's no reason for that when we have a million churches out there that you can partner with. Be like, we love what you're doing over here. We're going to help you get new pews and this, that, and we're going to grow it. And people that can't travel as far, we're going to make sure they go to your church. Churches are at competition with each other. Like I said, in my church,
It's hubris.
the growth came from people leaving other churches because we had the cool. That's the only reason.
Yeah, man, it's flat out hubris, because if you watch what a lot of these churches that are doing this say, they'll say we want to put a life-giving church on every corner, a life-giving church in every city around us. What's implied in that, though, is that, hey, we're a life-giving church. The other churches in our city, they're not life-giving. That's why
Yeah.
we need another church here. That's why we need another church in this community. We're better as a franchise, just duplicate it, put somebody on the screen, than these pastors who are already boots on the ground, or the pastors who feel called to plant and start a new church, right? So, um, again, we're trying to build so high, we're not focused on building wide. And it's the wide building that builds a foundation that protects people, disciples people, and actually leads to us being the church. So, like you talked about with the church in Florida that had that building that, was um, serving moms and families and kids that made the pro-life choice. Well, that's a wide decision. That's a discipleship decision. That's a we're going to be Jesus decision. Franchise churches starting new campuses let's just build real tall and get real big. And what happens if you build tall without a wide, strong foundation? Every time it's going to collapse. And when it collapses, it's going to hurt a whole lot of people who are in the vicinity.
It brings me to this point that churches who do this type of thing, and there's so many who do it, I don't know why they do it, but it's either a leadership problem or an ego problem where pastors are building these as trophies to themselves. You got Stephen Furtick at Elevation. I am convinced that Stephen Furtick is just addicted to building things that are his. I don't know how else to say this, but they are trophies. They're him saying, look what God has given me to build. Look what I've done. Stephen Furtick is one of the, and man, I love Elevation's music, so it hurts me to say this so badly. But like that type of church that they do these types of things, like Hillsong was the same. They are only testaments to the pastors. They're like, I'm so good that I got to be in Toronto over here, because Elevation has one in Toronto where it's polished, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to be on that screen. I need to be franchised everywhere. It's not about the gospel. It's about me. It's about me and my message, because I think my message is the most important thing ever. Forget all the heresy and everything, but that in itself alone, we got to stop that. You stop that right away. And you just, like you said, go to any small church in any big town. Like if you got a North Point church, go to a small church around there, a small church around here. I bet you the pastor that serves at that church that makes $25,000 a year is the salt of the earth in almost every way. And because people that serve at those types of churches, those are the people that should be the most famous, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, because those are the guys that are doing it for the right reasons. As soon as there's a pastor in there that is a millionaire or makes hundreds of millions of dollars and has a Breitling watch collection worth millions of dollars and brags about it in front of his congregation, that to me, I'm like, God, why are you not striking this guy with lightning, like into a pillar of salt? What is going on? It's sort of happening. But at the same time, like, as soon as you see that, how are people not waking up to that? Like a pastor walking on stage that is dressed in $5,000 worth of clothing. How are people still going to that church? How do you believe that that's what Jesus wanted for the church? What Peter was talking about? How do you square that circle to me? I want to ask everybody that goes to these churches, what is your explanation when a pastor walks up there after leaving his Range Rover or his G-Wagon and comes on stage dressed like this? How does that make you feel when there's a person in your church that literally lives in squalor and can't afford electricity or groceries? How does that make you feel?
Well, and even beyond that, you've probably seen this, but I've been a part of churches where there's a special offering at the end of the year. We call them miracle offerings. It's sow seed, do this thing, give extra, give above and beyond your tithe and offering. Maybe you're already giving 15-20% because that's what we're teaching, your tithe plus your offering, but we want you to dig really deep this one time a year in faith, sow into the future of the church. And then God is going to, whether they're implying it or saying it explicitly, God is going to bless you. God is going to heal you. God is going to provide for you. Sow this seed of faith. And man, I remember like we would ask people to dig deep. We would ask them to give beyond what they had in faith of what God would do. And I've said this on a couple of podcast episodes before, but we literally had them bring at one church, we had them bring their gifts and put them in treasure chests at the front of the stage, which I thought was, I always thought it was so tacky. I was like, this does not like look good. Right. But then here's the thing. That money, was it used for some good things? Yes. Was it used predominantly for like new campuses and stuff like that? Yeah. But those same years, we would throw away hundreds of thousands of dollars of decorations and things that we had bought and used once, and get rid of old lights and get rid of old sound stuff and all that. And it's like, guys, we could have asked people for a lot less. We're asking these people to give out of what they don't even have, and we're throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of stuff because we don't have room to store it and use it once. Like, there's got to be a better way to use that money. And again, if we're transparent and we say, hey, here's the budget, here's kind of what we spent. If you have questions more granularly, let us know. Well, then people can have discussions about that. Like, hey, if we just cut some of this fat, do we need that special offering every year? Right. And it throws me off, Josh. Like we'll tell people, hey, tithe in faith, give offerings in faith, that when you operate off 90, God's going to do more with that than you could do with 100. But then we have those same churches that many times say, but we have to have special offerings because the tithes and offerings you gave in faith wasn't enough. And it's like, no, if people are giving in faith and tithes and offerings is what you're teaching, then it should be enough. And if you don't have enough to do what you want to do, then is that Jesus telling you what you want to do is not what I'm providing for? There's just questions that we have to ask.
That's a good question. And also what made me think of this was the tithe and offerings are an important thing that we have to talk about. We don't talk about enough. But going back to the idea of the waste, if I'm convinced that if people who were donating to a church and were like loyally going to a place and have been going for years and years, were given an itemized list of the things that the church spent money on that year, they would no longer go to that church. There's not that if you got an itemized list of the church and what they had and what they wasted, you would be flabbergasted. But this brings me back to the tithe thing. And I did this on my channel too. I did a whole video on why you should stop tithing to churches. Now, I mean that clickbaitily, but at the same time, I also mean that to a degree where it says stop tithing money. And if you want to tithe money, that's your prerogative. And I think some churches do great things. And I think small churches, they should get your tithe because they need it to run and operate. And I get it. Some churches are struggling, and I understand that. And I'm saying to these churches that fly drummer boys from the ceiling and have angels and strippers on stage dancing for Christmas when they're paying, and they have private security for their pastor and they're doing all these kinds of things. If you want to tithe your time to a church, and this is what's going to go from me. Okay. I think I'm very talented in certain ways, and a church could use me in most ways. I don't think I'm in a position publicly that a church would ever want me to serve, to be honest with you. But if I was ever going to serve at a church ever again, I would, for one, never take a penny. I'm never going to do it again for money. And two, my time is worth a lot of money. I consider my time a lot of money. Like if I was going to go tell someone how to set up a podcast or to do video production, I'm charging thousands of dollars. Okay. If a church wants me to do that for them, I'm happy to do it. Right? Absolutely. Especially if I believe in the ministry of the church and the mission of the church, and they have good people. Whatever you want, I'm there for. But I'm going to tell you this. That's what I just gave you is worth probably $5,000 worth of the money I would charge a regular person. And so in lieu, my time is a tithe. But a church doesn't accept that. A church wants you to volunteer till it hurts and to give money till it hurts. Ask your church, hey, is it okay to tithe with my time instead of money? I want to hear what their answer would be. Now, a lot of them be like, yeah, no problem, because they don't want to hurt you. But a church, if you stopped tithing to a church and you've been giving faithfully for 20 years, and all of a sudden you stop tithing, who's going to come talk to you? And you say, look, you know what? I'm going to instead tithe this money. I'm going to tithe my time on stage design crew, or I'm going to volunteer my time as a musician, or I'm going to do sound, or I'm going to pull up chairs, or I'm going to do parking ministry, which nobody really wants to do. I'm going to do these things. No church will ever recognize that the time you give is a tithe. They say tithe with a glad heart, give sacrificially, because that's God's going to turn that into. But they never talk about the time that you give is what it's going to turn into. And they will burn out, especially big churches. It's a burnout train. They know it's coming. It's built into the cost. And that's what makes me angry, because they build the cost into burning out staff and volunteers, and they don't seem to care.
Well, those numbers are tracked at most big churches. And I say this not just like I'm not spitballing. I'm not making this up. I've seen it. I've been in the rooms. Those numbers are tracked. Like, how often are we losing people? How long does the average volunteer before they leave? How much do they tithe, and how long do they tithe before they leave? And we got a couple of videos up. I need to redo them because we're in such a better place production wise than we were when we did those, and even had some things go wrong on those. Like if it wasn't for AI saving us, it wouldn't have even been legible. Great conversation. But one of the things that I tell people is, hey, look, the Bible does teach you to be generous, and where God calls you to be generous, give generously. Sometimes that means to your church.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that means to other nonprofits. Sometimes that means helping your neighbor put a roof on their house,
mm-hmm.
right? And it has nothing to do with giving to the church, but being the church. But at the same time, the idea of tithing, when you look at it theologically even, and when I was in the church, I couldn't say this. I had all the theology degrees. I'd been taught the right way to say it. I couldn't say it. Now that I'm not a day-to-day pastor, I can say it. When you, and I love pastors who actually say this, because there are many who will teach this, okay? But when you look at scripture, tithing in the Old Testament, one, it was for Israel. It was to support the Levites, who were a tribe because they had no land, okay? It was never once money. There was one concession where you could turn it into money, but you had to use that money to buy food when you got where you were going, right? Mm-hmm. In the New Testament, there's no mention of tithing after the cross. And when Jesus mentions tithing and says, yes, you should do this thing among others, he's talking to Jews still under the law, and he's talking about mint, dill, and cumin. He's talking about an agricultural tithe. So when you trace back and you look at scripture, you don't see a compulsory monetary tithe for the church. When you go through church history, it's not until 567 AD at the Council of Tours when the church started taking tithes again. Right. And it was a way of, oh, well, we need money. How can we do this? Well, remember that Old Testament thing? That works. Right. So part of this is, and I know there's going to be people who disagree with that. And every time I talk about that, they're like, Jeff, you lost me. No, Malachi 3:10, it says you're going to rob from God. Well, Malachi 3:10 wasn't for you, friend. Wasn't to the church, wasn't to Gentiles, wasn't talking about money. But I say this stuff, even if people disagree with me, Josh, what I want them to do is I want to encourage people, just go back and read the Bible for yourself and do your very best not to read your current understanding or tradition into it.
Mhm.
And instead just ask, what would the original audience have heard? Because a lot of times we're going to get a very different view of what the church is and how we should operate as the church than we do when we read it with what we know. Because when we read it what we know, we're going to see what we know, but it's not necessarily there.
It's so funny because as soon as people understand the Bible for themselves, everything changes. So it's in a church's best interest, especially a mega church, for people to not read their Bibles. Like, go ask your pastor if you go to a large church, hey, instead of giving to this church, I've decided that the $150 I'm going to give every week, I'm going to take the $150. I'm going to go buy some socks. I'm going to go buy some food, and I'm going to go walk downtown with my family. I'm going to give it to homeless people. Are you cool with that? Right? I want truly people to say that to their pastors, and I want them to ask the question: do you think God will honor that? Do you think that he'll bless me through that? And he'll probably say yes, but at the same time, they'll never preach that from the stage. Give me a church that's going to say, you know what, guys, we're good here. Here's what we need every week. We're happy to have that. And anything past that, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to go buy some socks. It's winter in Canada. Okay, it's cold as a witch's tit out here. Okay, I need you to go get some blankets. I need you to go get some warm food, and I want you to go with your family. Be safe about it. But this is, God commanded us to feed the hungry, clothe the naked. Churches aren't doing that, and that was lost a long time. Now some are. Now don't get me wrong. I say this in general, and I mean this in general. Churches aren't doing it, right? They're not. They're clothing themselves in riches and in idolatry and golden calves, and they are worshiping the carpet that they walk in, and then the brand new chairs that they had a committee that they put together that they for years, and the old lady complained about the carpet color, and they do all this. They waste so much money on garbage. If you took 5% of the church's income as a whole and put it in towards the local communities where the churches existed, there would be no more poverty. I don't think there, like, it may be a little bit, but there would be so much more that would be taken care of that the government wouldn't have to do much, is what I'm saying. And then it would justify you not having a tax-free status, right? The tax-free status for churches is because the church supports the community. Name me a church that's a mega church that supports its community. Now, I'm not saying, oh, we go do a drive out here once in a while. We do this love thing where we do a free garage sale for people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying give till it hurts. If churches gave till it hurt like they asked people to do, it would solve so many problems locally.
If most of our churches would give 10% to their local community, just to caring for their local community, and if you want to give internationally, you can. That could be your offering, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If we just gave 10% to our local community, and not a lot of the stuff we call missions, it's not really missions, right? It would make a huge impact. But if you look at a lot of churches, you're not getting their financial statements, but if you get a hold of them, a lot of times we're giving 2 to 5% to missions as a whole, and a lot of that's international stuff, right? So there's so much more that we could give. And I know you enjoy like Nathan Atfel and the religion business and the work they're doing with the documentary they're going to be releasing soon.
Love it.
We had them on the podcast a year ago. You should have them on your show if it works out when they release the documentary. I'm sure they'd love to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But they literally say, if we took just the money, and they've got the numbers, if we took just the money that is stolen from churches, right? Just the money that's stolen from churches annually, we could solve like the top 3 to 5 problems in the world. Like, we're talking about stuff like world hunger. It either doesn't exist or it exists so differently from it exists now, right? There's diseases like malaria that we can actually stop, that we could stop overnight. And that's not even asking churches to give 10%. It's asking us to make sure money doesn't get stolen, right? To be more careful here. And part of that is transparency and everything else. So anyway, man, I appreciate this discussion so much. I want to honor your time, and I know we're kind of running out of time. So I want you to do 2 things. Before you leave, one, I want you to let people know where they can follow along with your work. And I know there's gonna be some people that you go, God, that guy cussed, or he said some stuff that bothered me, right? And look, that's okay. We try not to edit people out or do anything like that. Josh isn't for everybody, right? And he knows that. But for others of you, you go, I really like, how real this guy is, and I like that work he's doing to stop child exploitation. I want you to be able to check out his channel. So 1, tell people where they can follow you. And 2, we always want to be solutions oriented, because could you give, like, just as you look at the church in North America, what is your advice or your encouragement, the steps that the church could take to protect people to look like Jesus and to make the biggest impact in the world?
Sure. Yeah, well, you can find me on all the platforms, Dad Challenge Podcast. And again, my channel is about the exploitation of children, but I do dabble in religion and church hurt and in religion in general and Bible stories. I like doing that stuff. It's my favorite part of my wife doesn't like generally what I do, like, because I'm pretty rude to people. But I'm rude to people who exploit children. But she loves the Bible stories of swearing. And my wife is a very prudent, very proper Christian girl. So that's saying a lot. But I think one of the solutions, I think what we can do, and this is a true thing, is that when people wake up to this thing, you got to spread it. You really, really got to talk to the people inside your church. The church is going to hate you for it. Okay. They're going to think you're a toxic cancer, but you really got to get your message out there. If you found something that's going on wrong in your church, call it out. Don't be afraid to call it out. And if you feel like you're being a sinner by doing it, you're not. I mean, the church should be held accountable. I think over anything else. I mean, we have a responsibility to the people that we serve, and that is God's people, and that is people that are potentially going to be followers of Jesus. And when a church misuses the funds and the trust and all that stuff, it needs to be called out. And those who have information and those who know things, do not feel guilty about coming out and telling the world, because that's the only way the church is going to get better. And unfortunately, they're going to have to be forced to be better. And it's only going to happen through people who take stances, who aren't going to be blind to it.
And I love it, man. They can, people can follow even the example that you set. That doesn't mean you have to go public with everything right off the bat. Start out with just a conversation, right? Mm-hmm. We only need to go public with things when they're like really bad and they're criminal, or when people aren't willing to have conversations about it. I know for us, before we, let loose that NDA or anything else, we tried to get a one-on-one conversation with one of the pastors and just couldn't get it. So, man, I appreciate you. I appreciate you sharing this with us. I know there's a lot of hurt that you've experienced. I know these conversations aren't always easy. So thank you just for the conversation, helping us peel back the curtain a little bit, but still for the hope that you bring. I think it's very evident. You have a lot of hope for the church. You have a heart for God. And I really appreciate that. And look, stuff like the Bible stories with swearing, it's not for everybody, but it's going to help some people dig into the Bible like they never have before in a way that a lot of us couldn't do in a church service. Right. So I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate your work. And I thank you so much, because, man, you're a way bigger deal than anything that we're doing over here, So I appreciate you taking the time to just spend 90 minutes with a small podcast and help us have this conversation. Now, for you, everybody who's watching and listening.
Yeah, I appreciate what you guys are doing too.
Oh, thank you, man. Thank you.
And I'm definitely going to look into it more. And like, I want to have a peek behind the curtain about what you guys are doing. And I'm happy to help in any way I can too.
Oh, for sure, man. And ask any question. We're literally open books, because that's the only way we can't poke on churches the way we do if we're not open books. So,
yeah, I love it.
But for those of you that listen today, I hope that you have been encouraged. I hope you've been challenged. Let us know in the comments below what challenged you the most about this conversation, right? Let us know what surprised you. Let us know what you disagree with. I want to hear it all, because these are conversations that we need to have. And guys, we'll be back with another podcast soon. But until then, grace and peace. We'll see you on the next episode of the Church Disrupted podcast.